So what I'm going to do is actually two things, combine two talks in one. I'm writing the India chapter of higher education, so I'm going to first set the context for the higher education systems and policy section, and then I will talk a bit about the higher education system in India. I wanted to say that little symbol there, I put it to remind me to tell you that I had the good fortune to work on the draft national education policy. We started in August of 2017, or at least I got involved in August 2017, and it's still going on. The public inputs have come in. We have received 1 lakh plus inputs. It crossed 1 lakh day before yesterday, and it's still open for public comments till August 15th anyhow. So more will come in, and Dr. Kasturirangan wanted to use this Mobius strip to kind of indicate that education has no beginning or end, and so yeah. So as we all know, higher education empowers youth to navigate their lives and to contribute meaningfully to the economy and society. So the Springer was specific to say that each chapter is about the status of higher education in the country. We cannot use any information that is not referenceable, so it's about status. So that represents a problem for us in India, because we are getting a new education policy after 30 plus years, and we would love to use it, but unless the government actually announces it as its own policy, we cannot use it at all. So we are at this very strange cusp of, so it'll be a question of which deadlines come first, actually. But in the context of of higher education chapters, I have shared with all the authors. I mean, Dr. Parshuraman was also involved, a potential list of topics that we might want to discuss. So I'll go through them with you. We needed to talk about the history of higher education, of course, but it's also covered in other sections. Neeta is going to do history of education, so I don't know what the overlap is. This meeting will help us find out. But I would think that actually it is probably more important to focus on the last 70 years. Post-World War II, around the same time, many of our countries got independence, and I think 70 years is enough to reflect on whether we have set our education systems in the right direction or not. So that's pretty important. I would feel that that's important. The next section that we want to talk about is the present status of higher education in each country. That involves talking about gross enrollment ratio and capacity issues. And I suspect that as in India, in most of the South Asian countries, the problem will be of having sufficient quality capacity. So, we may have capacity, but there will always be severe competition for some of the best institutions in the country. And so we need to talk about that, because that's related directly to the quality of education delivery. And of course, access and equity related questions are center stage. So we'll have to talk about, the participation and retention of differently abled students, social, ethnic, and language minorities, women, regional disparities, other constitutionally protected groups. And I'll touch on that when I come to the India section. And of course, we have to talk about the higher education institutions themselves, both on the government sector and in the private sector. So, India's higher education system is largely private. By that I mean 78% of higher education institutions in India are either private, unaided, or private aided. I'll come back to those numbers. So what does that mean? We need to discuss. We also need to talk about autonomy. This morning we talked about how it's the duty of academics to actually push back and to take charge of their curriculum and to deliver the right kind of curriculum to the students. So we need to talk about autonomy, administration, and governance issues. And in fact, it's a pity that even in the new education policy, we talked about autonomy, and it's getting pushback from academia. I mean, nobody wants autonomy, including academia. And given what Professor Khan said in the morning, I think it's something to worry about, that. And then, of course, we'll talk about undergraduate education. And here there is a very important sort of overlap with school education, because it is the higher education system that produces the teachers that teach in our schools. So that's an important section that needs to be covered. I don't remember, Dipti, if you've covered it. Teacher education, not a lot, yeah, not too much. But of course, the other topic that came up for discussion this morning was vocational education. And vocational education is very critical, and I will sort of dwell on it at length with your indulgence later in my talk. So then the next chapter is, of course, postgraduate education and research. And typically in developed countries, you will find that postgraduate enrollment is about 50% of undergraduate enrollment. But in our countries, you will find that it varies between 10 and 15% or so, roughly. And of course, postgraduate education and quality postgraduate education research has deep impact on preparation of faculty, both, as I said, for school, but also for higher education, because it's our PhD students who go back and be faculty. And the fact that we don't have many South Asian countries, I would imagine, certainly India doesn't have sufficient research, means that there is insufficient new knowledge creation, which has again a profound impact on economy, because where are the new generations of products and manufacturing that he talked about in the morning. And then, of course, we want to talk about faculty in higher education, their preparation, arrangements for their continuous professional development and career progression, their preparation. So in India, I would say I should apologize for this, I didn't extract the percentage of faculty who are master's degree holders. Many more faculty in higher education are master's degree holders rather than PhD degree holders. PhD enrollment in India is less than 0.5% of all enrollment, which is really a very small number. Although we must not sort of rely only on credentials, but this does matter that we don't have enough PhD students, not even in the pipeline, to man our educational institutions. Thank you, Gopi. And then, of course, as with many places in the world, it's always been discussed that we have this pernicious problem of contract employment of faculty. And I'd love to know from all the other countries whether that's the problem in your countries too, and how, if any, we can address it at all, actually, And then with regard to curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment, I think that almost directly as a result of having inherited the colonial education, we have ended up sort of putting grouping subjects and offering it to students as subject groups, rather than allowing students to have free choice of subjects. And so this is something that we need to do, break the silos of subject groups. And of course, we said that higher education has to be of benefit to society, and how is it going to be of benefit to society if it's not experiential and with direct connect with students learning what the problems in society are and how to deal with them. And then, of course, we have the need to, globalization has made sure that we have to abide by international standards, not least because our students want to migrate, and we also want to invite foreign students into India or to various countries, because they bring income, but they also increase the diversity of the student body, which has benefits for everybody, actually. And then technology in education is another subject that I'd like to see written about. And there, I think that most of the issues are to do with quality. It's not the fact that student attention spans are like 6 minutes was only discovered after MIT and Harvard got into MOOCs, and then they decided to do the research and say, is this actually making a difference? And they were measuring, student responses and so on, and they came out. I mean, it's not clear to me why we didn't find out, given that we had IGNOU, doing online courses for such a long time. So I think we are not looking into feedback, and with technology and online education, this is very important. And it's actually 11% of enrollment in India, so that's a sizable number. I would say both. I mean, it's clubbed together, so it's probably more is distance, but yeah, now it's slowly moving towards online, yeah. So, and then of course we want to, so the other thing about technology in education is that if it's done badly, then it has an impact on, it has a positive impact on access, but a negative impact on equity, because then those people get a poorer education actually, rather than if they would be in a classroom. So it's not a great thing. With regard to governance in higher education, regulation and funding, we want to look at, we discussed this morning, we want to look at the potential for devolution of state bureaucratic control to institutions. And as he said, it's not hopeless. We have to work on making it happen. And so I don't know what the situation is in Bangladesh, for example, or Bhutan. So we'll wait for the country presentations to know. And, you know, excellence in education is now a buzzword, so every country wants to aspire for have at least a few institutions in its world-class tag list. But excellence has to be pursued for its own sake. We need initiatives and methodologies to improve educational outcomes. So it would be good to hear about what various countries are doing towards that. And of course, accreditation. There is national accreditation, I believe, in all countries, but it's, for example, in India, when the engineering group signed up the Washington Accord and started aligning with international standards of engineering education, that accreditation levels went up sharply, actually. So, international norms also matter. And then, of course, we want to discuss policy changes to enable reforms. India hasn't had a new policy for over 30 years. And people have said that, oh, you don't need a policy, you can fix whatever is broken. And one example of that is the Rashtriya Uchatar Shiksha Abhiyan, or the National Higher Education Mission, which was born in TIS, and I was at a consultation in January 2013. It came, like a grand vision for higher education funding with 1 lakh crore promised and so on. But today we find, 5-6 years later, that it's actually fizzled out. I do think that a good new policy framework is necessary for something like this. And of course, what are the challenges? The most important challenges are, of course, globalization and privatization, but there is also, like I mentioned before, capacity in quality educational institutions. So either you make all the institutions very good, or you increase capacity in quality in institutions. I'll come back to that when I talk about policy. And it's a worrying thing that everybody in higher education, you're supposed to be sort of at least some bit of it learning for its own sake, actually. But that's giving way to this very pragmatic thing about employability and jobs, and that's one issue. And as I said, privatization of higher education has an impact on equity because inevitably the fees are high, and so many groups of students cannot access education in private institutions. And with globalization, you wanted there was a lot of talk about foreign universities being able to come and set up in India, but that didn't happen. There is some discussion on internationalization. That's because in India, we have over 200,000 students going out each year to study. That's a lot of money going out of the country. What is coming in terms of my incoming students, is 45,000 students, and it's remained flat for many years. And we have students from neighboring countries and some African countries. And that's a very, very small number. But it's true that many Indian students would like to go abroad, and therefore arrangements with international, with many countries for recognition of courses and, all of that is very, very important for these students who seek to go abroad to either study or work. And of course, you know, the government of India has started a Study in India program, and that is very important because actually, if you want to attract foreign students, you will make your curriculum good, actually, and that can, in some ways, it can aid in improving the quality of courses offered in home countries. Right? And the amazing thing is that of the 45,000 students who come to India, more than half are here in Karnataka, and in Manipal, mostly, 30-40%, and then Christ University and St. Joseph's. Yeah. And of course, the last thing on the contents that we will have in the higher education program is policy changes and the prospects for reform, what reforms are needed and why in each country, and implementation and some indication of implemented related concerns. So that's sort of the context for the higher education chapter. I'm going to move on and talk about India. I mean, when Padma and Rekha wrote in their proposal that South Asia accounts for 24% of the world's population and also 27% of the world's youth, 29% of the world's illiterates, and 40% of the world's poor, I mean, sadly, I think we will contribute to a lot. India will contribute a lot to the world's illiterates and the world's poor for sure. We have 17.6% of the world's population when I last checked. You know, that was the day before yesterday. So, and of course, you know, the region is home to a high concentration of linguistic, cultural, and religious diversities and social and economic inequalities. So, policy and higher education implementation in India is a very big challenge. So let's look at some pictures. But before that, we'll just look at some numbers quickly. This was the number I pulled out day before yesterday. So 1 out of every 6 people in the world lives in India. Total enrollment is approximately 36 million with over 79% in undergraduate courses. And GER is approximately 26%, up from just 10% in 2004. And this is something that is worth, in the last 15 years, you know, so up until 2004, only 1 in 10 Indians got a university education. And it's only as of after 2004, now we are like 1 in lesser, yeah, 5 maybe, or less than 5. So we have 993 universities and some 37,000 plus colleges. These are the most recent numbers I could find from MHRD. And like I said, more than 65% are private unaided institutions and 13.5% are private aided ones. Last 10 or 12, 13 years, and you know, we've never crossed, except for a brief hiatus in, a time in 2010-11, we've never crossed 4% of GDP. And if you look at the expenditure on higher education, it's really pitiable because after 2010-11, it didn't go up, it went down, even though our population has been steadily going up. So, you know, in terms of expenditure per student, it is dropping very, very sharply, and this has very serious repercussions. If you look at the historical development, I don't want to spend too much time on it. We had about, I think these numbers, I find them suspect. I've read 20 universities and some few 500 colleges or something at around 50, 51, but we've now reached 993 universities, and this number is higher because of the different places that this data has probably come from. But this is also an MHRD graph, actually. And then, yes, of course, you look at GER. As I said, we hit 2004 is not here, but we hit 10% in 2004, and then since then we've been growing in sharp spurts, and we expect to grow more sharply in towards 2021, 22. But as I said, as we discussed in the morning, this is all regular university education. If there is not enough vocational component, that also is overemphasizing university education, and that would be bad. Here's a graph for growth of universities. It speaks for itself. Somehow somebody forgot to put 2010 there's one number missing, or maybe it's in the next graph. Anyway, so we are here at 993 universities, and here's the graph for colleges. Some colleges have been closing down because, especially engineering colleges, haven't been able to, their poor quality has caught up with them and they don't have enough admissions, and then they close down. So, which one? Previous one was universities. Yeah, this was universities, and this is the growth of colleges. So post-liberalization in the early 2000s, privatization set in very fast. So you can see this, the jump. And here I think is what I was saying, that 2001, 2002 is missing actually. So
affiliated colleges?
Sorry? Yeah, they are all affiliated colleges.
Offering honors and master's degree?
They are offering bachelor's and master's degree, yeah. No. Very few offer honors degrees. Yeah, we have regular bachelor's degrees, 3-year bachelor degrees. And then here's the comparison of GER across countries. We are here and China's at 43, and these are all the many developed countries. And here what I want to emphasize is the fact that the 12th five-year plan estimated that only 5% of Indian youth get vocational education. That is not enough to run an economy, really, and we have to understand that. And so we have to understand, we have to try to understand why it is that vocational education failed so spectacularly in the country.
Bangladesh, 17.62%.
Which one? The GER?
Yes.
Okay, that's a pretty good number. And if you look, if you see the US, if you say that 86% GER, 52% of that comes from vocational education. So it's usually a larger proportion of students who are trained in vocational education than in university. People who go to university is typically 20 to 30%, not more actually. And so we should also not be, India's hurtling towards 30% GER, but we should not be adding more GER through university admissions. We should add more vocational education. Sorry, you had a question?
South Korea is actually very interesting because this means that a lot of people in these countries receive both.
Yes, that's right. So I'm coming back to, I'll come back. This is true. We had a conference in TIS in October on vocational education, and we had representatives from Korea coming. He was laughing. He said, oh, you should take this with a pinch of salt. But basically, what they are doing is mainstreaming vocational education. Yeah, they're doing that. And then when you look at GER, the number 25.8 or 26% looks good until you look at the regional disparities. And you can see something like this. This is probably Puducherry, but it has not been labeled, I think, for ease of reading, actually. And there's Bihar, 13%. I don't know what UP is, but it's one of the unlabeled. No, UP is here. UP is 25% GER? MHRD data. I don't know. Anyway, so southern states and then union territories like Puducherry, Chandigarh and Delhi have good GER, but by and large the eastern states and central India have poor GERs actually. So regional disparities are a lot, and that's a challenge for higher education. Karnataka is not here? Karnataka is one of the higher ones. I would think that it's no, I'm sorry. I would think that it's probably this one, 45. I would think that is this one. I didn't go and see the full separation, but it kind of gives you an idea that there is tremendous disparity, regional disparity in India in terms of access to university education. If you look at GER across categories, it doesn't look that disastrous, although yes, it's true here these numbers are poor, but they all show an increasing trend, and the male-female separation is not that bad in higher education, and overall there is a difference, but yeah. Sorry? Rural and urban will show up more starkly, yeah, that's true, yeah. And and then we come to research funding, and you have to see that we have 0.62% of a 2.5 trillion GDP, and you have China doing 2% of a 12 trillion economy, and the United States doing nearly 3% of a 19 trillion economy. So that talks about how much money actually in absolute amounts are going into research. So we really need to worry about research funding. And in terms of research outputs, you can see naturally that it's pretty bad. And then recently released UNESCO report, they said India had 156 researchers per million population relative to China, which has 1,000 plus, US 4,000 plus, and Israel 8,000 plus. That's why they're known as the innovation economy. And if you look at the breakup of funding for research, DRDO has the highest amount, and then Department of Space, Atomic Energy, Agriculture, CSIR, DST, DBT, ICMR. I have not seen a comparison between funding for social sciences, so I don't know where it would be, but I would imagine that it is not bigger than ICMR, for sure, yeah, no funding for social sciences. Anyway, so this is a graph for growth of teaching staff. We have about 1.3 million. This disparity is because of some change of how they gather data. Yeah, Aish has started doing direct calculations. Yeah. So those are the issues in higher education as a result of all the graphs that you've seen. 93% of undergraduate enrollment is with state universities, which are relatively poorly funded. There is extreme fragmentation of institutions. 18.5% colleges have enrollment below 100. That's not an environment in which students can do any useful peer learning. And only 3.6% have enrollment above 3,000. 40% of colleges teach only a single discipline. Over half of these, 55% of these are teacher education colleges. So, and we have feedback coming in on the new education policy, and I'm told that there is tremendous opposition to shutting down of the teacher education colleges. So, there is, yeah. And opposition? Opposition, yeah. Because lots of politicians are involved in teacher education colleges. And and then, most of these issues we have discussed. So I just don't know. I don't know if I can take 2 minutes and just talk about the education policy. It's not.
Question.
Yeah, sorry? Go ahead.
If you go to the previous slide,
yeah.
Over 93% of undergraduate enrollment is in the relatively poorly funded state universities.
Yeah.
But in terms of the private colleges that you showed, their number far exceeds.
No. So the private colleges are affiliated to state universities.
Okay.
So when you count the enrollment, yeah. So Mumbai University has 700 plus colleges. Andhra University has 900 plus. So they would come under the umbrella of university. Also because the university then determines their curriculum and conducts the examinations. So. So yeah, I just wanted to say that, here's the vision for higher education. Naturally, you want to overcome the fragmentation. You want to make undergraduate education more liberal. You want to insist that there is autonomy to faculty and also autonomy to higher education institutions, and that the autonomy that is given to institutions percolates down to the faculty and the administration. Otherwise, autonomy is also quite useless because we have situations like that. And then have the autonomous colleges take charge of curriculum and drive quality, and strengthen research funding, improve the governance of institutions. At the moment, I think this is something that we can all discuss in common. Vice chancellors don't have any bosses per se, other than the state government itself. And this is bad because the vice chancellor is then the executive head and the head of the academic council. And if there is a bad vice chancellor, he can take a university down very quickly, actually. So he or she. So it's important that the institutions have boards of governors. And of course, we need, we are reforming regulation a lot. If we have time, we'll come back to it. And of course, we are setting up a National Education Commission. I noticed that Sri Lanka has a National Education Commission. I don't know if the function is the same. The idea is that, the policy world is actually very taken with, sort of discussing this fact that only about 1 in 7 policy implementations tend to succeed. And this is because, some people who think they know all the answers make the policy and then leave it to some other people to implement, and the spirit is never passed on, and policy implementations fail. What seems to be working now, and this is a new trend internationally also, is that you have a policy, you start implementing it, gather data continuously, and tweak policy as necessary in order to achieve the goal. And that is really the goal of the National Education Commission. I won't go anymore, I'm run out of time, so I'll stop. I have several slides on the education policy, but some other time. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much. Yeah.